Go live. I'm just, checking in with all our social media channels here while we wait for Yanni, who's always the one holding up the show, but we'll be live with you soon.
Hip pain. Today we are going to take you out on the gym floor and show you how to progress glute strength exercises. We're also going to progress our hip stability so we keep those dynamic stabilizers of the hip going and getting strong. I've got two legends with me. We're revealing a massive knowledge bomb for you guys on how to train and overcome hip problems, compromised hips, and we're also going to reveal a bit of a mistake people are making when they're trying to put this together into a program. All that and more coming up right after this. We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.
Hey everyone, in case we haven't met, my name's Rad Burmeister. That's my brother Yanni Burmeister. We're the co-founders of Unity Gym and the co-creators of the UMS, the Unified Movement System, where we teach you how to move instead of diet and exercise. We also teach you how to nourish. I forgot that part. And over there is Phil White. He's our resident physiotherapist. And today we are talking about hip stabilization exercises and taking you through some slightly, not maybe more advanced, but just along the chain of the progression. So
more complex, absolutely.
More complex progressions.
And if you
for
tuned
hip
in
stability.
early, you would have seen Rad's nip slip. If you'd like more of that, smash up the likes. Smash up the likes.
Don't give it away too early.
But don't give it, we got to wait for likes.
Oh, no.
Look,
okay.
4 already.
There you
Boom.
For every
If you'd
like we get, I'll do another nip slip.
Oh yeah, we're going to take it there, folks. And also, for anyone who catches or jumps on the live stream, please dive in and tell us where you're watching from. We love to help you out, answer your questions. We will get to the questions at the end. I've got a couple of pages here. That will be towards the end of the show. Anyway, Phil, how are you?
Very well. Just had a nice ride into work.
Yep.
Didn't die. Great result.
Good, beautiful, perfect. On that note, if Richie's ready, we'll dive out onto the gym floor. I'm super excited to show you these exercises, and we're going to dive in and just recap what muscles we're targeting here, because there are 2 sort of systems of muscle working in the joint. We're working with a ball and socket joint in the hip, so we have the dynamic stabilizers, and we've talked about those earlier in the week. There is arguably 6. I said 5 muscles. Phil corrected me.
Numbers don't matter.
No, unless it's a bench press competition, then they do matter. All right, you ready to go? Let's band up.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, so first and foremost, Rad's just going to quickly put this band around his knees. Now, we call these glute loops after the doc Brett Contreras aptly named them and aptly named the glute guy. It's just basically a TheraBand around the knees. You can make one yourself, or you can get these on your on like eBay, Amazon, whatever else. I'll link them in the description of the video.
Tie together anything stringy, and if you don't have a band, don't let that hold you back. You can still do the same thing anyway. So what we're doing is we're doing pretty much the same thing as you saw yesterday if you tuned in. Except now we're going to start to add uneven surfaces, because it's really important to remember when you're doing dynamic stability of the hip, it's not just the hip in isolation. What happens at the hip is a result of what's happening down the chain as well. So when we start to add in this uneven surface, it just starts to increase that sort of stability demand, but also starts to put a bit more challenge in your ankles and your pelvic stabilizers to keep you in this nice sort of strong position, which is really going to help keep that ball in the middle of the socket.
I feel like I should have a mic where I'm like, and what do you think about that, Dr. Phil?
Over to you. So the good way to do it is to set up facing a mirror. So if Rad faces that way, he can then step back. This little block we got here is just a foam mat that we've got rolled up. It's sort of meant to, like, if you don't have one of these at home, then using a pillow is a great way to start. So don't let the lack of equipment hold you back, all right? So we're doing basically the same thing as we did yesterday. So we're going to start to add in that challenge of moving the leg around. Now you've got an extra stability demand on there as well. So you can start to see it's a bit more challenging than yesterday, but we're doing back and forth, side to side, add in some circles. The exact positions you go into is less important with the moving foot. It's all about building up that burn in your left foot.
So that's the key here, guys, and I'll reiterate that. The exercise is occurring in the stable straight leg, the non-moving limb. In that hip, that's where you should feel the burn. This here is just to create dynamic instability. So we're trying to make the body have to work to fight that movement that's going on around it. And as you can see, Rad is working quite hard there. Now, we can progress here to what I call a duradisc. I don't know what they call it in physio land.
I'm sure it's called that. I just...
It could also be called a stability disc, but I've always called it a duradisc. And this is literally, like, I think it cost me about $15 from Amazon or eBay. And we got a bunch of these here. I used it. I helped as part of my knee rehab program after I had a knee reconstruction as a progression down the track. But this is just going to make it a little bit harder than the soft surface for Rad. And, you know, you're probably by this stage thinking, okay, so it's certainly not all happening in the hip now. There's a lot happening in his ankle. There's also a lot happening in his knee. And that's a really important insight to take out of this. And we're going to talk about that once we go back in the studio. We're now really moving into training the whole kinetic train with these movements. The whole lower limb is working really hard. And we're going to share why that's important when we go back into the studio in a sec. Just one more, just to demonstrate on the hardest surface, which is, this is another type of duradisc, but it's an inflatable duradisc, and you can choose how much air you put into this one. The more air you put into it, the harder it becomes because you sink down into it less. And it's a lot harder. It's by far the hardest surface to hold on to.
The things that Rad's really aiming to do there is keep that single leg stance nice and strong and keeping the pelvis nice and level. So when you're looking into that mirror, the things you're kind of looking for is keeping your waistband of your, the shorts or tights, whatever you're wearing, nice and level. Because when you're able to keep that level, it means that the muscles around your hip are doing a really good job at keeping, nice and supported, but also your ankle is working really hard and your knee, as we said. So that's the feedback you're looking for. And again, like yesterday we talked about, we're kind of looking for time for these. So, start with, you'll have to bit of feedback for yourself if you start to feel the burn after 20 seconds, and that's plenty, and then start to build on this day by day. Rad, did you find you start to feel a bit of something going on there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to progress the single leg deadlift that we demonstrated in the last episode. We were using a kettlebell with the load in front of the body, and the progression here is we're moving into a single leg squat. Now, this is going to look very similar in mechanics, what's happening in the hip here, but we've changed the load. Now the load is on his shoulders, and it's closer to a sort of low bar back squat, what's occurring in his body. I usually would get the barbell set a little bit lower on the shoulders than what Rad's got there. He's got a very, very conditioned upper trapezius, so that if the bar rolls up onto his neck a little bit, it won't affect him as much. But I usually go for a low bar position on the shoulders for the single leg squat, because essentially you are tilting forward more so than you would in a high bar back squat, which is a little bit above a lot of the people that are here, but just understand that that's what's occurring. So when we're doing this single leg squat, we're getting that whole dynamic stability mechanism working, but now we're adding into it the bend, the hinge in the hip forward. So we're now working the hamstrings, the glute max, keeping the knee out and not allowing like a knee vulgar or a knee buckling inward is working the glute med as well. And we're getting that whole complex and system of muscles working. What I love about single leg movements, which is emphasized on the soft surface and the duradisc, is that we're also working the everters and inverters in the foot and the ankle. We're working all of the stability muscles down there. So as we're going to go back into the studio and really dissect why these exercises are so good, the key takeaway from this is that the body works as systems, and we always talk about this. You can't compartmentalize the body in very, very regressed rehabilitation purposes, but once you move forward and start to progress, we talk, and we're going to talk about this a lot in tomorrow's show, the concept of progressive overload. One of the key elements of progressive overload is progress in complexity of movement. And one of the best ways to add complexity to movement is to go to multi-joints or larger parts of your kinetic chain so that the body starts to work functionally like it does in the real world.
Just a quick demonstration of that high bar versus low bar position. So with the dowel rod here, I've got it on the top of my traps. That's a high bar position. And Yanni was talking about getting a bit lower onto low bar there, which means when you're down into that position, it's a bit more on top of your body. Right?
That's right. Yeah, so that's pretty much the only difference.
Just to clear that up.
Yep.
And also the reason why that is harder than the single leg kettlebell deadlift is because of the leverage. When you raise the weight higher up on your body, you're raising the center of gravity, so it makes it harder down here. And also you remove your arms to be able to stabilize you. So your arms are fixed and you can't kind of swing around like that.
Just on a completely different subject, if anyone from Sennheiser is watching this, could you donate a couple of other lapel mics for us? We bought 2 digital lapel mics, but
and we'll wear Sennheiser shirts.
And we'll wear Sennheiser shirts, yeah, absolutely, for a whole year. We bought 2 digital mics from Rode, and they interfere with the signal for the cameras, so they were cutting out, and we spent a truckload of cash on them.
Happening?
Yeah. I've looked into it.
Really?
Yeah, the Sennheisers are an analog mic system, and they don't get interference from the digital signals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's why it worked perfectly when we shot the video, but when we use the live stream equipment, it doesn't work.
What a shame. Is that what it is?
That's what it is. The guy actually told me that could happen and, when I was buying it.
Oh, that would have been a good thing too.
Yeah, but
Should be right, mate.
they're half the price, mate. We saved money.
And now we can't use them.
I know.
What a bargain.
I know. How good is it? So, Sennheiser, hook us up, please.
So we don't have any more likes, which means I won't be showing any more nipple, which is unfortunate for you guys. Hit up the like button. For every like we get, I'm going to flash a bit of nipple.
Yeah,
and,
we get an accidental
and
nip slip.
leave a comment with where your what your name is and where you're watching
what you'd like
from.
to do with the nipple.
Yeah. leave that one out.
So, back on track though. So we got those two exercises. Remember, we're working two systems that sort of have really key jobs, and they of course work together. Now, when we do a barbell back squat and a big heavy deadlift, bilateral movements, both they working at the same time, all of these systems are operating subconsciously together. And I don't want you to start thinking, oh my God, I've got to start working this movement and that movement and whatever else. But there is a need for that when you're regressing right back, because remember, with every layer of regression, we're not just regressing things like intensity, the obvious how much weight do I lift, we are regressing the complexity of movement.
Yeah, and that's really the key, is that, we're trying to do these, these exercises might look a bit like, silly and out there, but what it's really doing is just getting you to be able to switch on those things sort of subconsciously, and so when you do transfer into those bigger movements, so it'll work without you having to think about it. And especially if you're going out and playing sport, then if you've trained up, especially on the soft surface, if you're landing in grass or sand, then like having this sort of subconscious ability to be able to like use these muscles in their sort of desired way, then that's going to be really helpful. And just to like really make it clear why we did the first type and the second type of exercise there is that on the first one, it's really trying to just key into just those sort of stability, like the balance muscles, which are working to keep that good sort of level posture and active stability of the hip. The second one is you're starting to add in these global movers, so the big muscles that you went through, so your glutes, your hammies, and your quads, because those are the ones that are going to start adding the gliding motions on your hip when you start doing the squat-like movement. So you're using, all like the big muscles there will start to force that glide, but you've already kind of started to train the anti-glide muscles. So that's the reason for having those two. And
one thing I'd like to cross over and get Rad's feedback on, because what steered us down this rabbit hole was that Rad and I have both sustained a lot of shoulder injuries, and I know we're talking about hips here, but I'm going to digress because there's a point to this. We sustained a lot of shoulder injuries in the past, and we rehabbed them the common way that a sort of a savvy gym person would rehab, which is just to deload intensity and volume for a period of time and wait for the body to heal itself, and then start to build that intensity and volume back up again. And it was sort of, in 2006, I had an experience with a great physio who taught me about the concept of the stability mechanisms and the shoulder stabilizers. And then Rad had another experience with that recently. And why don't you share how much of a breakthrough it was for you with your shoulder rehab? Like
doing what? Sorry.
Just starting to go right back and retrain the stabilizers, because it's the same system. You got the same sort of things operating in these joints.
It's been a game changer. It's my body. I mean, I'm still in the process of rehabbing, so I'm in the advanced stages of rehabbing where I'm reintroducing complex and barbell movements. So I'm not out of the woods yet, but there's aspects of my shoulders which are stronger now than they've ever been before, because I've never done this work before.
And the only setbacks you had really was that you like re-racked a bar wrong,
yeah,
so it wasn't right. Like it wasn't part of the rehab didn't set you back. It's just an unlucky
that's right.
incident.
Yeah.
So
Phil's saying one day when because I hadn't done any barbell bench pressing for 6 months, and I set the rack up at the wrong height, and I only had 40 kilos, which is what saved me, but I missed the rack and it fell down on my injured arm. So Phil's saying
things were tracking so well, and then it was had a bit of it, so
set me back, but that's part of the journey. It's been a game changer. It's been a game changer doing this stuff, and I'm passing this knowledge on to our members all the time. We've got a member in the gym at the moment who's going through golfer's elbow medial epicondylitis that Phil's working with as well, and it's you're just delivering that same information, which is to go back and to focus on what your body needs now is going to get you to where you want to be quicker than by just trying to push through and not dealing with the imbalances and issues in your body that cause the injury.
I just want to press on something really key that Rad just said there, which you may have missed or overlooked. his shoulders feel stronger than ever. Now, I had the same experience in 2006 when I worked with, it was Leroy that helped me rehab my shoulder, and he introduced me to the concept of, this simple concept of, go back and retrain the stabilizers and the scapular control mechanisms, and then go back into your big pressing movements and pulling movements and stuff like that. And ever since then, and my shoulder was meant to be operated on. It never got operated on, but my left shoulder ended up being stronger than my right shoulder in all of the stability work, like external rotations, all that sort of stuff. It was so much stronger, and it always has been, because I had that focus on it, and I probably didn't cross-pollinate enough and do the same stuff, the rehab stuff on my right side as much as I should have. But I cannot stress this enough. So for all of you sitting out there going, I just can't be bothered going back to this level of regression where we're really cultivating stronger neural pathways to the dynamic stabilizers in the hip and shoulder, I can't stress to you enough how beneficial this will be to your long-term game and strength, and things like that. So look, let's just dive in and make sure that people are understanding the key concepts here. Recap on the 6 stabilizer muscles. Do you want to bring them up, Richie, so that people can see what we're talking about? Phil, you can probably explain these better than me, but just very quickly explain what they are. Don't spend too much time on it.
Yeah, so basically it's just looking at the hip diagram that we've got up here.
Bring up Glute 1, Richie.
Yeah,
yep.
it's
It's up, yep.
Got the delay. So it's basically just to kind of show, like, it really does resemble the shoulder blade in a lot of ways, and how the rotator cuff, goes from a sort of stable point and out to onto the moving point to be able to help that sort of stopping of the glide. So just here we've got piriformis, everyone's favorite personal trainer's favorite muscle, and then you've got the sort of the muscles all coming down in the line there that you can see. That's just a little thing to help out the people at home who really find when they're trying to do these exercises, when they're trying to do these stability muscle stuff, it can be a bit sort of ephemeral and a bit hard to know what you're doing. But if you've got these sort of muscles in your mind there, then it's I think it can be really helpful for some people.
Yep.
So I don't need to go too deep into exactly which one's which, because they all are sort of functioning to the same sort of thing there. So.
Yeah. And
Morning, Quack. Thanks for tuning
Quack.
in, brother.
Yeah, morning, mate. And then you can see that the big global muscles on the outside that have been sort of cut there to reveal the underlayer are there doing the job with them and supporting them and things like that. So
and you can imagine how when they go and attach onto the lower down the limb, you suddenly got this kind of big powerful leverage where they can produce a lot of force and a lot of movement, and so that's why you have to have these sort of inner unit muscles to be able
hold
to
it in the joint,
yeah,
steady
exactly,
it in the joint.
Otherwise you'd just be slipping and sliding all over the place, which passive structures do not like.
Yeah, Quack, I agree, mate. How good is Richie's professional fucking split screen? It's cool. Smash up the likes if you like what Richie's doing there for us. Now, the other thing I want to reiterate is the importance of training these muscles if you haven't done so before. Like a lot of people, and I have a lot of friends who don't do any single leg work. They just dive straight into bilateral work. And, there is something to be said about creating insanely big, strong global muscles. They do sort of, it helps to have really strong glute max, really strong glute med, and these muscles will sort of come along for the ride. But for a lot of people, especially people who haven't been lifting weights since they were a teenager, they're going to have really unstable hips, and they're going to have really unstable joints, And or on the other hand, if you've suffered quite a bad injury and you've had time off training, or you've had surgery or something like that, then there's a real need to go in and really sort of work these dynamic stabilizers, which are the muscles underneath those big global muscles. And for that, you do need to regress back to starting to do some stuff.
I've done quite a bit of time in aged care and in hospital placements through my physio degree, and just seeing the amount of total hip replacements that we had to deal with, where people, just had arthritis to the level where they opted for a hip replacement because they were just in so much pain. So this is what it comes down to. These are the muscles that are protecting your passive structures, the cartilage in your hip, the labrum in your hip, from long-term damage, because they're going to make the whole sort of movement of the joint smooth and stopping these sort of long-term things. So it's really important to just keep in mind, like, what are your long-term goals? What do you want to be doing when you're retired? Like,
So on that note, sorry to interrupt you, we all spend a lot of time as gym buffs working the shoulder rotator cuff muscles, irrespective of your strength. Like, I even know the strongest guys in the world do rotator cuff work, but I don't see the strongest guys in the world doing hip stabilizer work. Should we? Should we all be doing a little bit of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things that we've kind of talked about. The more you can just add in stuff frequently, like, you don't have to do it to, for an hour-long session on this stuff. It's just about getting sort of that frequency builds up that neural drive, which builds up that sort of ability to, for these muscles to be strong and active throughout everything. So, like, it's just so key for long-term knee health, long-term hip health, and back pain, because the more you're sort of moving around your hips, and you've got up and down the chain, are going to have trouble. So,
absolutely.
Like, I just think it's...
Well, hey, look, there's a lot more knee and hip replacements getting done than shoulder and elbow replacements.
Well, that's it, because you've got a weight-bearing joints. Now,
we might be onto something big here.
Well, it's probably a bit different in the people who watch this, because there are a lot of handstand enthusiasts that I know. So I guess the shoulders are sort of a bit more a weight-bearing joint in this cohort. But I mean, the hips and the knees are, like, you've got to support those weight-bearing joints.
Yeah. So, Rad, because you've been quiet for a while, I'm going to get you to drive home the key insight from today's show, and it's important that you announce it so that Freon can use it.
So the key insight from today's show is how the rest of your lower body impacts the dynamic stability demands of your hip. The more unstable your ankle, the more instability gets fed up the chain to your hip. So that is what we've been talking about in this episode, is to, as you progress your hip stability work, you start looking into exercises like what we demonstrated today that bring the ankle and the knee into the stabilization chain. So you're working the whole lower limb, even your core, as a part of it.
Yeah.
And the biggest mistake we see people make when rehabbing a hip pain issue is that they don't look at the body as a system and forget to train the whole kinetic chain, including the ankle, knee, and hip, just like what we just said.
Yeah. So basically, like, a lot of sort of hip programs, glute programs, just go into, lots of sort of floor-based exercises where you're doing lots and lots of hip thrusts, lots and lots of, weighted stuff, which is really great for hip strength. Like, hip strength is key. But if you've then got an ankle that's sort of, especially if you've had a few rolled ankles in the past, a bit of injury there, if you've got this ankle that's moving around loads and your knee's not transferring that load nice and smoothly up the chain, then your hip suddenly got way more demand to try and minimize the movement. So it's just...
on a side note, I've watched Kalisha, my partner. She's like the glute queen. She just is fascinated with glutes, and one of the people that she really likes working with is Brett Contreras, and he's released a book recently. I think it's called The Glute Lab. She just bought it. She's very excited about it, and it's like an encyclopedia of glute training. And it really surprised me how many freaking glute exercises he's got in there, and I haven't looked too deep into it, but man, he's got a lot of glute training exercises, stuff that I've never seen before. And it is. I think it's an area that could probably use a little bit more attention.
Yeah, and again, it's about your goals and your demands. So if you just want to go into bodybuilding or figure modeling or something like that, then spend your time building up those big muscles. But if you want to have play some sports, do things in the gym, and have a healthy system long term, then the stability is key.
This is a really good question here that's come through from Eric Strauss. Hey fellas, last I tuned in, I mentioned I may have a meniscus or tendonitis issue of the knee. Turns out it's a minor meniscus. Would the single leg banded work be good to loop in as part of the rehab? Now, I'll start and then I'll let Phil dive in on this one, because he'll be the guy to talk to. In my understanding, when you've got a meniscal tear, and it really depends on what kind of tear it is, there's a whole bunch of different meniscal tears, and if you've got a displaced or undisplaced flap tear that could get a lot worse, you've got to be extra careful with it. And it also, where the location of the meniscal tear, the knee doesn't get a lot of blood flow. The very outer rim of the meniscus might get a little bit, but not so much anywhere else. So if it's depending on the area of the tear, it can be, it can heal, but most of them won't heal. So what you got to do when you got a meniscal tear is to just not aggravate it as much as possible. And Phil might correct me here, but when you stand on one leg and rotate, that can be one of the key things that will really aggravate or make it hurt. So doing anti-stability work, you've got to be a little bit cautious. What would you say?
Yeah, no, Yanni's spot on there. Like not all meniscal tears are equal, and it's good to see here. I've just seen that you said that you are seeing a physio about this. So definitely, follow their advice and really good to see they're doing a lot of glute activation work there, because as we've sort of mentioned before, like when your hips are nice and active, then you've got a nice sort of straight line down the knee where you start to load your knee really nicely and your ankle. So if you're weak up through or not very active up through your glutes, then you're going to get more of the I guess the valgus or the varus different knee forces. So basically not loading your knee in a fairly straight line. So this stuff is potentially going to be a good thing to use, but just talk to your physio about whether or not you should add it in, because it's with meniscus things, you don't want to be training through too much pain. You really want to let it settle down. So if you're able to do the one without an uneven surface, and you're just really feeling it through, like you're starting to feel that fatigue through the hip, and you're not feeling anything through the knee, then like absolutely go ahead.
Yeah.
But again, work with physio and don't train through pain.
And I would be doing, there's a lot of good stuff you can do to train the ankle too. Like I'd be training the ankle a lot. I'd be training the calves a lot. I'd be training the perennials a lot. And that's where you can, where isolation can play a really big role, because you might not be strong, capable with that meniscal tear to do a lot of heavy anti-stability, like really complex anti-stability stuff yet. So you can regress back to isolation. You can do plantar flexion movements. You can do dorsiflexion movements under load to build up those active structures down in the calf and the ankle.
Yeah, I mean, the key with injury is like not letting everything else atrophy around it. So you got to try and find ways of still, keeping the muscles working while you're taking a bit of time off your legs. So.
Yeah, that's right. And what I also find is when I did my knee, I had a meniscal damage to the meniscus as well. One of the keys was I kept squatting and I kept doing stuff, but I just did a much more partial range, and I did much more slow eccentric reps to really, really get that eccentric contraction so that I could sort of hypertrophy the muscle still, but minimizing that range of motion until I had that strength and stability back in the knee.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Rock on, Eric says. Absolutely, mate. Do not let it discourage you from training. There is so much that you can do, and just hit us up if you want some ideas. Rad, you got a couple of shout outs to do, and then we'll bring this in for a landing.
So Mega Lol is saying, is it possible to fix the scapular wing without equipment? On our best scapular stabilization exercises for the scapular push-up tutorial. It is. I think there's some exercises that pop into my mind, but if you just had some of the bands that we have and a dowel rod, there's you really just take up the amount of exercises that you can do to a whole nother level. So that's really minimal equipment, but you're going to get a massive improvement in what you can do.
There's heaps you can do though. You can do the prone scapular control drills on the floor. You can do the W wall slide on the wall.
Yeah, like the scapular wing is largely about your serratus anterior as well. So pushing motions where you do have that protraction in there as well, as long as you're making sure you're doing all the shoulder posture stuff as well, so that releasing through the pecs, strengthening through the back, getting some of that serratus anterior activation is really key. And I guess if you do have very severe strain, make sure when you look at your scapular winging, there are some neurological conditions that can lead to scapular winging. So if it's really severe and it's not improving, then definitely go see someone about it, because
the
that
long
can be
thoracic nerve.
That's one.
The long thoracic nerve. If it's damaged.
Sinet Santangelo is saying, I can't read this one because it's cut off halfway, so unfortunately, Sinet. Mike Sack is saying full like. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thank you, mate. If there was a full like button, I'd expect you to whack it.
Wanks, I think, is Juancs. I'm guessing that's a Spanish or Latino name.
What?
Hey guys, do you have any video where you make one where you talk about groin pain, adductor? I've had this pain quite high up near the groin and can't get rid of it. Don't know when to stretch it or strengthen it. Thanks, great videos. Sure, man, if we get a little bit more interest, if anybody's interested in that topic, please let us know. Give a comment, and if we get enough interest, we'll absolutely
and
do
maybe
it for you,
Phil
man.
can jump in and offline and give you a little bit of feedback.
Yep.
The first thing that we're always going to say is to go and see a professional and get help with diagnosing it, to make sure that it's not an inguinal ligament tear or something.
Just find out what it is, because then you can do more more with it. So.
That's right, absolutely. And we're happy to help you with exercise selection and progression and all that sort of stuff, you know.
Khairul Islam is saying on one of our stories, I've been suffering winged scapula for the last 4 years. Please help me.
He's the guy that emailed us with all those photos.
Yanni's already.
I've responded
awesome.
to him. I think those have already been handled.
Awesome, great. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
And we've got a big one from Rachel Eastwood Stone there, but it's too long of a comment to read out here. We'll answer
Rachel, just get in on
personally.
the online when you've got questions like that. Just get straight in on the online UMS coaching. That's what you're paying for access for.
We'll do a personal video.
We'll help you out personally.
Yep.
So that's it, guys. That's all we've got time for today.
Tomorrow we're going to wrap this series up, and we're going to talk about how to progressively overload all of this stuff that we've been doing this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Rad. See you tomorrow. Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.